Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Republican presidential candidates have just 1 week to convince voters in Iowa to support them. With just 6 days to go into the first of the nation caucuses, former President Donald Trump was not out on the campaign trail today. Instead, he was in the courtroom, attending a hearing on his claim of presidential immunity in the 2020 election case. The Republican frontrunner holds a commanding lead in the Hawkeye state, and that's according to a CBS News recent poll. We have Scott MacFarlane and Ed O'Keefe joining us now. Scott is CBS News congressional correspondent, and Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent joining us inside in Iowa. But Scott, I want to begin with you. And I think it's really telling that we have you and Ed here because this is kind of a preview of what we're going to see this campaign. Trump in the courtroom while also campaigning for the presidency. His team today, you were there, trying to make this argument that the president at the time was immune, should be immune from prosecution. What was the case that his lawyers were trying to make, and how did the judges respond?
An hour and 15 minutes of arguments, and throughout, you get the sense from the three judges on the appeals court, they're skeptical. They're dubious about what they heard from Trump's lawyer. He's making this multifaceted argument that he's shielded from prosecution in the election conspiracy case because he was the president doing official acts when the alleged crimes occurred. And he also made this argument that it would be a double jeopardy case for the former president because he was impeached but acquitted by the Senate, so he can't be criminally prosecuted for that reason. Right from the jump, Caitlin, the three judges pressed right into the heart of that argument, spent most of their time questioning Trump's lawyers. Before I explain where they went with it, let's take a listen to some of the exchanges in court from earlier today.
To authorize the prosecution of a president for his official acts would open a Pandora's box from which this nation may never recover.
I think it's paradoxical to say that his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed allows him to violate criminal laws.
Never before has there been allegations that a sitting president has, with private individuals and using the levers of power, sought to fundamentally subvert the democratic republic and the electoral system. And frankly, if that kind of fact pattern arises again, I think it would be awfully scary if there weren't some sort of mechanism by which to reach that criminally.
This sets up two big moments in the courtroom today. First of all, the judges made this, through their questioning, a prominent point. If Trump's lawyer is arguing he can only be prosecuted if he's convicted in an impeachment by the Senate, then they're contradicting their argument he can't be prosecuted at all. Kind of diminishes the idea of immunity. But more so, one of the judges, Florence Pan, new to the court, a Biden appointee, really pressed Trump's lawyers, saying, if you have presidential immunity, what do we make of a future president selling pardons? A future president ordering a SEAL team to assassinate his political opponent? And Trump's lawyer equivocated in the responses, going back to that old he's got to be impeached first issue. That's what the court's going to grapple with as they make their decision.
Any sort of sense of timeline? Is this something that can drag on? Both sides can appeal whatever the decision is.
The appeals courts are notoriously mercurial about their timetables. They rarely announce them, nor is there a deadline for this. They kind of set up the arguments promptly. They've moved swiftly to this point, which could indicate a swift ruling. But your point's, I think, the more prominent one. Whoever loses is going to appeal to the full appeals court, likely to the Supreme Court. All of that cannibalizes time. And with a March 4th trial date on the calendar, that's looking dubious. It may be pushed back well into 2024.
So it continues, and we will follow your reporting as it does. Scott MacFarlane, as always, thank you. Ed, I want to go to you, senior White House and political correspondent in Iowa, inside from a big snowstorm happening there. Good to see you, nice and warm, hopefully. So I do want to talk a little bit about this dynamic, how we're going to see kind of this split screen, Trump in the courtroom while also, trying to campaign, and in many ways, the courtroom being the campaign. I know you've been on the ground for several days talking to voters there. Our polls show the former president has a real commanding lead. You've been reporting on a robust ground game and targeted effort that he has. But what are voters telling you about, how they feel about these cases? Are they, in fact, helping him?
Well, first of all, it is great to see you back. And we just can't do this without you. So I'm glad you're back in the saddle. I know you're going to be out on the road soon. So welcome back. Out here in Iowa, Caitlin, I think what we picked on today, at least, is a little more skepticism about these surveys, these polls that show the former president with such a commanding double-digit lead. This is something I picked up on over the summer, and I think some of our other colleagues have heard as well, and I heard it again today, this idea that when someone's calling your house or calling your cell phone and saying who you're voting for, there's a skepticism about who exactly is on the other end of the line. And so there may be Republicans in this state who are going to say Trump out of concern that it might be somebody who is not a pollster. Incredible to think that that is a potential wrinkle here, but it could be. And we're not going to know until next Monday night, really, how big his advantage was. What we saw today is Nikki Haley holding the only really big event that she's done since she got here over the weekend, because one she was supposed to do yesterday when the snow was beginning was canceled. Today she really had no choice but to do it. There were a handful of people there, and we found the Republicans who are skeptical of whether former President Trump can be the party's nominee when he's dealing with all the things you and Scott were just talking about. Take a listen to this voter, for example, who raised some of those concerns.
I voted for him last time, but there's so many issues with him right now. Is he electable? You know, he's polarized the country quite a bit more than I think than the other two candidates. And then the issues is he going to be able to run? You know, all the criminal probes and things going on.
So as Bob Rawlings said, there's concern that he has that Trump may not be the one, and so he's trying to decide between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. There were others at that event who said the same. They get their chance to do that tomorrow night in a comparison shopping debate that the two will be holding at the same time that the former president will come back here to Iowa after his various court dates and hold his own separate town hall on another network. So voters here and across the country, in essence, will get a chance to sample them in a slightly more specific way. And it suggests that there is still a decent chunk of Republicans who have not made up their mind and who are still trying to decide if there's someone who's not inclined to support the former president.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, too, about how, you know, these voters are there meeting these candidates face to face, and there is potentially a chance for some kind of surprise. I'm curious, too, because I know you were at Nikki Haley's event today, but you've also spent a good amount of time covering DeSantis, and I'm curious if you've seen anything on the ground that kind of may negate some of the polling that we've seen showing Trump with a commanding lead, and if DeSantis is going after Trump in any more strategic ways.
So the thing that people have to remember everywhere else is the way you win a caucus is precinct by precinct, strategic, surgical almost, in where you find the voter that might be interested in you. Trump's been doing it for a while. DeSantis' Super PAC, that Never Back Down organization, has been doing it for longer, since last spring. What Haley doesn't have in terms of that, she does have in terms of outside support now from the group called Americans for Prosperity. Very well-known, ground operation, conservative organization that has tentacles all across the country, but especially here in Iowa. And you talk to people, they say, yes, I've been hearing from the DeSantis people. I've been hearing from the Trump people. I've been hearing from Americans for Prosperity on Haley's behalf. Is that going to be enough for her? We'll see. But certainly, you talk to veterans of this, you talk to voters who've shown up, and they say, Trump gets it now. He didn't get it back in 2016. He's built the operation he needs to make the calls and find hundreds of voters and hope that at least dozens of them show up at a caucus. DeSantis has done that, and that's what gives him the confidence, and that's why he continues to say, I'm going to do better than you think. Haley's the big unknown because she came in here later and she didn't spend as much time building that organization. We'll see. And the weather will be a factor, Caitlin. It's freezing, it's windy, there will be snow, and that will keep people away.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that's why we find you inside, but you may be pulled into extreme weather coverage if you haven't already. Ed O'Keefe, thank you for braving the elements for us, and we will talk to you soon. Stay safe and warm. And a quick programming note here. On Sunday, CBS News' Margaret Brennan will preview those Iowa caucuses at 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern. And on Monday, January 15th, Caucus Day, join us for all day long for up-to-the-minute coverage of the Iowa caucuses right here on CBS News. And next, we're going to bring in our political panel to assess the Republican field ahead of the caucuses and the state of President Biden's re-election campaign. You're streaming America Decides.
For those who don't seem to know, slavery was the cause of the Civil War. There's no negotiation about that.
And welcome back to America Decides. That was President Biden singling out Nikki Haley for recent comments failing to mention slavery as a reason for the Civil War. Haley, who has already backtracked those remarks, fired back at the president. And Deepa Shivram and Molly Ball join us now. Deepa is White House correspondent for NPR, and Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Ladies, great to see you and have you here. Happy campaign season. It is upon us. I know we've all been out on the trail together many a time, so looking forward to it again. Molly, I want to start with you because we were actually just talking. I just got back from maternity leave. I was gone for 4 months, and I've come back, and the fundamentals of the race seem kind of exactly how they were in August when I left. Trump with a commanding lead, and a question about whether DeSantis or Haley can vie for that kind of second place spot. From your reporting, what have you seen? Is that kind of the state of affairs?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I don't know how you can say nothing has changed. There's been an earthquake for second place. Look, it is true that the fundamentals of this campaign have been very, 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 very steady for really most of the past almost a year. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we have seen a lot of churn in that second place slot. Mm-hmm. We have seen Nikki Haley rise to really, I think, take over second place nationally, even potentially contending in Iowa, starting to have a little mini surge in New Hampshire. But it's all relative, and Donald Trump retains a commanding lead in the Republican primary, and that remains the overarching dynamic of this entire race. I think we've also seen the general election continue to be sort of a stalemate, right? No one has threatened President Biden for the Democratic nomination, despite some efforts by Dean Phillips, Robert F. Kennedy. But the president has really fallen behind in those general election trial heats. Now, a poll is a snapshot. It's how voters are feeling right now. It's not an attempt to predict what's going to happen in November, but it does have a lot of Democrats nervous about the president's political standing.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that, Deepa, because you're at the White House, but you've also covered Democrats in 2020. We're on the trail a lot. What was so interesting to me in 2020 was when you would talk to Democratic voters, they would always kind of place this premium on electability, right? They were kind of all focused on picking a candidate who could defeat Donald Trump. But talking to Republicans, there hasn't been that. And a lot of Republicans have told me, well, they think Biden is beatable anyway, with anyone. How is Biden and the White House team kind of thinking about all of this? And what vulnerabilities do you think they have with their own voters?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the last question first, right? I think this is going to be a tight election. We know that. It's always going to have been a tight election. And what Democrats are going to have to focus on is not necessarily, they're looking at the voters who are on the line, right? Folks who might be voting one way or another. It's also going to be about enthusiasm and turning out their base. That's something that, polling shows people aren't very passionate about a Joe Biden candidacy, a second term of Joe Biden. So that's something Democrats are going to have to focus on. And what you see Joe Biden doing, especially in these last couple of weeks, he gave that major address at Valley Forge just a couple of days ago. He is targeting Trump and naming Trump. He had a really, strong moment where he called Donald Trump a loser and is starting to use more combative language, taking on his supposed the Republican nominee and really starting to take a stronger pivot point towards taking Trump on a little bit more head on.
So you've had Biden start to take Trump on, but Republican candidates haven't really done that, Molly. I mean, they have started to sharpen the attacks a little bit, but there's just this dynamic where they can't do it too much to cross his voters, but yet they do have to show some kind of differential between themselves and the person that they're trying to beat. How have you seen that evolve, or has it evolved, and do they need to change it?
No, I do think that particularly, let's be real, there's really two Republican candidates besides Donald Trump still in this race, and it's Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. They're the ones who are going to be on that debate stage tomorrow night. They're the ones we're really watching to see whether they can be contenders at all with only days to go until the Iowa caucuses. And we have seen them sharpen their attacks against Trump in particular. But you're right. I mean, first of all, in a primary, voters don't necessarily want to see Republicans attack one another, right? They do want to see them take on the Democrat more. And so that's always a little bit of a tension. But in the case of Donald Trump, who has such a passionate following and who is viewed as a quasi-incumbent and whose political message is all about this us against them, this divide and conquer, where if you're not with him, you're against him, he is very difficult to attack. You know, there was a story earlier, a few months ago, about a Republican PAC that was trying to find ways to attack Donald Trump, and they tested all these different ads, and all of them backfired. Every attack they tried to make on Donald Trump only made his voters like him more. So it's possible that all of these Republican candidates have just faced an insurmountable task from the beginning because Donald Trump's voters fundamentally never really saw any reason to turn away from him and always viewed him as a former president, as the guy who just sort of deserved the spot.
Yeah, and if you see his rivals coming to his defense, especially after every court case, kind of gives them license to continue to support the former president. You mentioned a really interesting point about Trump running kind of as the incumbent, because that's certainly the case in the primary. And then he's also trying to run as kind of the insurgent outsider that he was last time around. I'm curious kind of how the White House is, or the re-election campaign is trying to figure that out. I mean, it has been 4 years, or what will have been 4 years since Trump was president.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really see the re-election campaign laying out the case against Donald Trump, particularly targeting the language that we've seen Trump using, saying that he wants to be a dictator on day one, calling his political opponents vermin. Like, that is language that the re-election campaign has made sure to highlight again and again and again, and reminding folks, you know, Donald Trump may not have been president these last couple of years, but this is still the rhetoric that we're hearing from him, and this is the promises that he's making. And so it's sort of kind of trying to remind American voters who have sort of maybe checked out a little bit from Donald Trump, not too much because he's obviously constantly in the news, but have been able to sort of take a back step to paying attention to Donald Trump all the time and sort of saying, hey, you know, like, one thing that Biden says all the time is, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative, right? And that's something that you really see this re-election campaign trying to drive home constantly.
Trying to drag out voters and supporters with that as well. We'll see how that works out. Molly and Deepa, thank you so much. We'll be talking to you a lot over the next couple weeks and months, and as we charge on to 2024. Wow. And we are learning more about Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's hospital visit over the past week. Austin had been hospitalized because of complications following prostate cancer surgery. He was admitted on January 1st and put into intensive care. A doctor at Walter Reed Hospital says the infection has since cleared. The Secretary has faced criticism over his lack of transparency over the matter. And Congress is back in session after their winter recess. We'll take you to Capitol Hill next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Congress is back in session ahead of a busy start to the new year. Tomorrow, House Republicans will hold the first impeachment hearing for Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. If the GOP succeeds, he would be the first cabinet secretary impeached in nearly 150 years. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian is back with us now. Thank you so much, Nicole. Good to see you. So let's start with the Mayorkas impeachment hearing tomorrow. What exactly are Republicans trying to do here, and what can we expect?
Well, this has been part of a continuing drumbeat on the part of House Republicans to really draw attention to this issue of the border. Just last week, we saw Speaker Mike Johnson go down with a delegation of House Republicans to Eagle Pass, Texas, where they really tried to use that opportunity to highlight what they believe is a failure of the Biden administration to properly address what's happening at the border and to stop the flow of illegal migrants from coming into the country. So from that standpoint, that is really the impetus to a certain extent behind this first impeachment hearing that is set to start in earnest Wednesday. The chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mark Green, has made clear that he believes that this is a dereliction of duty on the part of Secretary Mayorkas. The committee has been investigating the secretary, as well as doing a deeper dive into the administration policies. And so it's kind of culminating with this first impeachment hearing Wednesday.
And Nicole, a lot going on the Hill. They also have to fund the government sometime soon. What's the latest about where talks are in terms of that? Any momentum?
Well, in terms of, the border talks are kind of inching along. Probably the bigger talk here on the Hill is really with respect to overall funding for the government. And just today we heard from Senate Minority Mitch McConnell, who is now suggesting that perhaps a temporary stopgap funding measure may be needed to try to bridge the divide until lawmakers can get their appropriations bills passed. Of course, we know that there is a government funding deadline approaching in less than 2 weeks, January 19th. And so even though congressional leaders have agreed on a top line spending figure, getting all those bills passed in time could be an uphill challenge. So that's why the leader is suggesting today perhaps a short-term patch may be needed. That's something Speaker Johnson had at one point ruled out, but we don't know if he'll reopen the door to that potential proposal.
And I also wanted to ask you about news today that Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, who is facing an indictment on bribery charges, took to the Senate floor today. What exactly did he say? Is he planning to stay in office? And is he planning to run for re-election?
Well, he certainly did not announce his resignation when he went on the Senate floor earlier today, and he actually got quite emotional as he tried to defend some of the most recent allegations against him. Take a listen.
After 50 years of public service, this is not how I wanted to celebrate my Golden Jubilee. But I have never violated the public trust. I have been a patriot for and of my country.
And now this follows some additional allegations that were unsealed in that superseding indictment just last week, suggesting that the senator, or alleging that the senator, used his position of power here in Congress to help the government of Qatar. On the floor today, the senator denied that. He said that he will prove his innocence in court. But this was really an interesting turn of events on the part of the senator, who, when he was initially indicted, he held a press conference, but making these comments on the Senate floor and speaking directly to some of his colleagues who have called for his resignation and in some cases called for his expulsion. The senator, for now, standing his ground as far as his reelection. He said and told a small group of reporters that he has not made a decision. But when I pressed him when he might make a decision, he pointed to his last reelection campaign launch, which he said was in March of 2018. So maybe suggesting if he makes a decision, it could be coming this spring. Caitlin.
All right, we will keep an eye out for that announcement as pressure builds. Nicole Killian catching it all on Capitol Hill today with a very busy week ahead. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And that does it for us today. You're streaming CBS News.